Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I'm here with a tag. This is my book buying history tag. The tag was originated by Weepka over at One Book, One Review. I will link her video down below. But the inspiration for me doing this tag came from Brian over at Bookish. So I will link his video down below. His video just went up on Saturday, and I just thought it was a really good topic to talk about. And then I went and watched the original video, and I just really love the setup for this tag. The idea is there's only two questions, right? Where do I get my books, and how do I choose the books I get? But the idea is to talk about it in terms of what has changed, like in my life, but also like how the pandemic has affected, where you buy books and how you choose the books that you buy. So I thought that was really, really interesting because I have plenty to talk about basically. And I am going to be a little bit rambly. I apologize for that. A little bit of a life update here at the beginning. Today, I just submitted my grades into the registrar's office, and it's a really odd feeling for anybody that has been teaching during this pandemic year. We all just need rest. Both our students and those of us who have been teaching need rest. Anybody working at any school or university just needs rest, I think. And so, yeah. All right, let's start talking about where do I get my books. So when I was young, I became a reader when I moved, when my family moved. When I was, I guess, 9 years old was when I moved. I started fifth grade at a new school. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't allowed to just wander the streets in my neighborhood, and so the Scholastic Book Fair happened, and I started getting books from there. That's one of my first memories of getting books from there, especially the Babysitters Club. I discovered the Babysitters Club from the Scholastic Book Fair, and I didn't have the money to pay for it. My parents didn't really even have the money either. I'm not sure how that worked out, but I started getting the I think it was monthly subscription from the Babysitters Club, and you got a book every month. And then I started devouring anything I could get my hands on. So the elementary school library, I don't remember at all. But my mom would take us to the public library, and we had a pretty decent public library, at least from what I remember, and for my needs as a kid. Then when I transferred to the middle school library became a source for books for me. It's actually at my middle school library that I discovered my first romance novel, and then I started that discovering romance novels opened up so much. So growing up, we're a working class family. My mom worked at a factory. My dad worked for a while offshore, and then at Domino's for a long time. And so going to the library was a treat. We would walk. It was close enough that we could walk, so it became like a trip. We would walk to the library. My mom would let us spend as much time as we wanted at the library. I think my mom has always been a reader, even though she's the one that has had the hardest time with me being a reader. That's another story. But anyways, so she would just grab a book or several books at the library and then let me wander and spend hours just choosing books. So I didn't have a real plan of what I was reading. We've also talked about that in her original tag video, that I was not tracking my reading in any kind of way except for the summer reading challenge that the public libraries typically do during the summer. And that, I would track how much I was reading, because I always got whatever the prize was at the end. And so that that happened. so I tracked my summer reading through the public library challenge, but otherwise I didn't have a list of books I wanted to get to or anything like that. The other way I was acquiring books was through second hand shops. there in the town I grew up with, there's a main street with a lot of secondhand shops and lots of books. And books, especially romance novels, were really cheap. I could get several books for just a couple of dollars, and my mom had no problem with it because it was like, all right, yeah. And sometimes, we'd go to the secondhand shop and we'd each get an allowance, a certain amount of money, and it wasn't much. It was probably never over $5 or so. But in books, that's a lot, especially when in some of the shops you could get a book for a quarter, for 50 cents, for $1 if it was a hardcover. But that I started growing a collection of books that way. And then every time I talk about my childhood reading habits, I talk about how my dad ended up building me a bookcase that took up an entire wall in our living room, and because he was really encouraging of my reading. And so another way that I acquired books was by yard sales. And it's a reason why I actually haven't done a lot of yard sale shopping in a long time. But yard sales were really great for buying books, and again, also really cheap, a quarter, 50 cents, $1, and so that was always manageable for me. Then when I hit my teen years, Barnes and Noble and Borders became a thing. They built a big mall in my town, and so that's not where the Borders or Barnes and Noble were at, but that, like, shopping as I became a teenager became a bigger deal. There was a new mall, and all of that, and so I started going to Barnes and Noble and Borders. I specifically really remember the Borders because it was a brand new building, and and the smell of fresh books at Borders was just really great, and they had a coffee shop, and it was like an event to be able to go. But I did not buy a lot of books at Borders or Barnes & Noble because I was buying books from secondhand shops and yard sales, and I really couldn't afford the full price of books. If I was really lucky, I could save up and spend the money on that. But as a teenager, I was also saving up to, like, eat out with friends and, like, buy clothes and all of that stuff. So I just didn't need to spend the money there. But it was a bit of it was like a Disneyland trip to me, right? Like, the fact that my parents could drive me to Borders and let me spend some time there. Sometimes my mom would drop me off at Borders while she went off and did other errands, and then she would pick me up. So that's a really cool memory. But it's still to this day, secondhand shops are I just have really nostalgic, positive feelings about buying books there because they were my main source of books. Then as I got older and started having more disposable income, then my reading habits changed. Was not really tracking it. In high school, I started getting into classics. Actually, some of it started in middle school because I remember trying to read The Scarlet Letter as a middle schooler. Read the first few chapters. I had to put it down because I was not understanding a single thing that was happening. Picked that back up in high school, and then I could understand a lot more of The Scarlet Letter. And then I read through the entire Jane Austen oeuvre in high school. So I got really into classics because of the AP English book list. What I had to do for my AP English class was pick a book over the summer to read, and most of the books on the list were classics. And then we had to do a whole project and presentation when school classes started. And I remember that, as people were presenting on books, writing down lists, and that was probably my first reading list. But yeah, now of course let's go back pre-pandemic. I was buying books from a lot of different places. I stopped my obsession with reading for fun in graduate school, and there my focus was reading books for my PhD, and I was buying most of those through Amazon. At that point, Amazon was still fairly new, and selling books and cheap books was one of its primary businesses for Amazon. And so in graduate school, I was buying a lot of my nonfiction books through Amazon. Then a few years ago, when I discovered BookTube, and I decided I wanted to focus on reading for fun again, I have started buying books from everywhere. I like supporting independent bookstores, and I have the disposable income to be able to do that. I still buy a lot of my nonfiction from Amazon, sometimes because it might be harder to find stuff or things that I need quickly, and so Amazon can get them to me quickly. And also, maybe just some of it is just I've never purchased a lot of academic books from independent bookstores, and like a lot of that would have to be special ordered, and I just don't do that because Amazon makes it so much easier to just find it and order it. Yeah. Some of that has changed for me, and I'll talk about that in a second. I did start keeping track of the books I'm reading via Goodreads. Goodreads has a lot of problems with it, but that's one of the ways in which I've been doing it. And then just this year, I put together a spreadsheet where I'm also keeping track of my reading, because I realized that some of the things that I like to track, Goodreads doesn't track. Things like, how many, like gender identity of the writers I'm reading, racial and ethnic identity of the writers I'm reading, things like that. Goodreads does not track, and so I needed a spreadsheet to be able to track some of that, just to see. I have a sense that I read quite diversely, but I wanted to see if my sense of that actually matches up to the numbers. And then the pandemic hit. One of the things that the pandemic changed for me was like not being able to walk into a bookstore, right? Where that's one of the things that I really like to do, is walking into the bookstore, whether it's an independent bookstore, whether it's Barnes & Noble, whether it's a used bookstore. I love walking into a bookstore and just spending hours there. And my significant other is not a reader. He's actually not a reader, but he likes going to the bookstore with me. Sometimes if we're going to Barnes & Noble, he can get a drink and just sit at the coffee shop, but he actually rarely does that. He just, he wanders some of the business aisles, some of the self-help aisles, the magazine aisles, and he's totally cool just sitting and being on his phone while I wander. So that has never, the fact that he's not a reader has never been a problem in our relationship, because he is totally okay with me spending hours at the bookstore, and that's fine. But all right, the pandemic hits, and on top of that, we moved the same week that stay-at-home orders were issued in California. And so that has impacted where I get my books a lot. I used to live 5 minutes away from a used bookstore. In the town that I'm currently in, there was a bookstore. Because of the pandemic and the issues of the rent on the building, they actually shut down the bookstore during the pandemic and moved to a different state. So there is no independent bookstore in my town. But I live in Southern California, so there are independent bookstores short drives away. Depending on traffic. Always depending on traffic in Southern California. And so I had not been into a bookstore until a couple of weeks ago. Once I was fully vaccinated, then I felt comfortable going to the bookstore. And so I've been to our local Barnes & Noble a couple of times. The first time I went in, I was so overwhelmed that I did not buy a single book. I only bought a puzzle. I'm currently working on it. But so that means, so I've still been acquiring books over the pandemic. What I've done is place online orders, primarily from independent bookstores, because they were hit quite hard by the pandemic. One of my local bookstores, a lot of their biggest selling days happened during Comic-Con. And with Comic-Con not being in person anymore, that really hit them hard. And so I, as much as I can, place orders from the independent bookstores closest to me. If I'm ordering romance novels, I make it a point of ordering either from the Rip Bodice or from Love Sweet Arrow, and which are two romance focused bookstores in the US. If anything else, especially with sci-fi mystery, I'm ordering from one of the other local bookstores. What has really changed since the pandemic is my buying of used books. A lot of the books on my shelves are used books from the used bookstore shop, and that just has stopped. That just has stopped. Online, I'm still, I guess, in the process of figuring out how to buy used bookstores online and where to. I'll sometimes find them from Amazon sellers, but I am trying as much as I can to not buy from Amazon. So, there are sites like Thrift Bookstore and Better Books World. I think those are the ones they are. If I'm wrong, I'll correct that, but I will place the links below because I've seen people I follow on Instagram use those two websites, and so just now I started figuring out those websites and seeing if I like them, but I am hoping that I can find a used bookstore somewhere near me in Southern California. It should not be too hard. I just haven't gone ahead and done it. There are some things that so mostly non-fiction books, academic non-fiction books I do still order from Amazon, but everything else I've really transitioned to ordering it online from an independent bookstore. And okay, in terms of how I choose what I read now, and how the pandemic has affected that. The pandemic hasn't really affected that, other than I can't just browse and randomly find books. So I'm much more, because I have to order it online, I can be more intentional with my book buying and less kind of, impulse buying at the bookstore. But I get a lot of my TBR, my to be read list from YouTube. Lately, Shannon, her channel name is That's So Po. Like everything she reads and she likes, I'm like, oh well, I gotta add that. In fact, half of my May wrap up is gonna be books that she recently read and reviewed on her channel. Cousin at Always Doing gives me a lot of recommendations. Dee Dee at Brown Girl Reading always makes my TBR expand. So thank you. And Olivia Savannah over at Olivia's Catastrophe. I'll link their channels below. Those are the people that I have been getting a lot of books recommendations from. And I am, like I said, now I track my reading on Goodreads. So if you want to follow me on there, the link is down below. And I actively use Goodreads and my spreadsheet for that. And I do cover buy to some extent still. I tend to not since the pandemic. Usually if I really like a cover, it also comes with a recommendation off of somewhere, off of BookTube, off of Instagram. I just started Book Talk, and so I don't actually have my TikTok account linked down below, but I'll make sure to put that in this video. And I've started doing that. The TikTok format, though, is such that it can be harder to get full reviews of books, but it's really great for like lists and things like that. And that hasn't yet been playing a huge role in the books I'm buying, but that could change because I've just started down that path. So Instagram can inspire some cover buys. But like again, usually the people that I'm following on Instagram are people that will not just post a picture of a book, they'll also add some thoughts, a premise, something like that, to the book, and that so it's not just a cover buy. I just started going into Barnes & Noble, and I haven't done a whole lot of cover buying. It's mostly I use Goodreads. I pull up my TBR from Goodreads and I see, all right, what is this? Does Barnes & Noble have that's on my TBR and that I can buy today? And then also, of course, browsing, and from time to time I'll find some book on the Barnes & Noble bookshelf that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but looks really interesting, and I'm interested in reading it, so I buy it. Oof, okay, that got a little rambly. Oh, one last thing. Library. Because I moved during the pandemic, I have not been able to get a physical library card. I do love going to the library still. So lately I primarily use the library for ebooks and audiobooks. And I use that extensively. But this week I'm planning on going into my public library for the first time, checking it out. Their library services are open. They've actually been open for a while. It's just now that I finally finished my semester that I feel like, okay, I can just go get my library card, check out some books. So watch out for some of those library books to be mentioned on my channel in the future. Okay, that got a little rambly. But hopefully that gives you some idea of how the pandemic has affected where I'm buying books and how I'm choosing the books I'm buying, and then just how some of my overall habits have changed over the course of my life. So let me know down below how you get your used books, especially if you haven't been walking into a used bookstore or you don't have one easily accessible where you live. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.